Well, Mr. Durham, I know that your family goes back to the very beginning of Cobb County and even to the land lottery. Why don't you talk a little bit about your family history?
I'll be glad to. And I take a lot of this from some research that my uncle did several years ago. The Durham family originally came from Virginia, but then settled into South Carolina, and in a small town there, had extensive land holdings there. And then when the land lottery was set up by the state, based on what the president at that time had directed the state to do, and that was to settle the Indian Territory. They came in. I think there was either 4 or 5 brothers that came into Cobb in 1832, 1833. I'm not real sure about the exact date, and settled in an area on Ackworth U.S. Road near the intersection of Ackworth and Highway 41. They pooled their lotteries holdings together, and I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but they traded land here to someone else in order to be close. And I think they ended up with about 450 acres in the family. And from there, spread out. As the boys grew older and got out on their own, they moved on into Paulding County, into Polk County, and Bartow, and several different other areas, and to establish their own homesteads.
Mm-hmm. Now, your father and mother were on Mars Hill Road. Talk about that a little bit. I did a wonderful interview with Harvey and Bessie.
That was so interesting.
Way back, it was 1988.
It was.
We did that.
It was very interesting, and I treasure that moment we had with you and them, and appreciate what you wrote that is at the KSU library. That property that I grew up on there came down through my grandmother, Mary Alexander. Her father had bought the property back sometime in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then when he died, she inherited the property. And she and then my grandfather then bought it from her and put it in his name. And then when my grandfather, she died first, and when he died, my dad purchased it from his siblings. Excuse me.
So talk about growing up on the farm.
It was interesting. I was just barely post-Depression days, but we still lived as if we were in the Depression. Mm-hmm. My parents both were very frugal.
Well, you were born about 39?
39. Okay. And my mom was one of the first, I didn't realize it at the time, but she was one of the first organic gardeners, because she didn't believe in using commercial fertilizer. Mm-hmm. We had cattle, we had chickens, and we had our own fertilizer. So she was pretty adamant about not using that commercial fertilizer. We did, in the early days when I was younger, my dad had a sawmill in the front yard. We grew our own corn for cornmeal. We grew our own wheat for flour, and did our own, subsisted on our own.
Did you have a grist mill that you took it to?
We did. There was a local grist mill that, and actually it was the little building is still standing on Ackworth U.S. Road where the corn was ground. I remember taking it there. But an interesting thing that happened with us, especially as a young child, we were involved with the city of Ackworth because we would come to town on Saturday to bring our produce, our chickens, our eggs, our butter, to sell or trade at the grocery store for coffee, sugar, salt, things that we couldn't make on our own. I was about probably 9, 10, or 11, along in that age, but the grocery store there was two grocery stores in town at that time. They were side by side. One of them was McClure's, and that's the one my mom always wanted to go to. But it just so happened to be next door to the theater. So while she was shopping in the grocery store, I would spend my 9 cents to see a movie, and my dad would walk down to this place now, to the Mew Barn. And I had an uncle that ran the Mew Barn. So, excuse me. But that's kind of the way we got involved with the city early on. Henry was just here, and an interesting thing there that there's a seating area outside Henry's building. It's a kind of a little bench. Well, the men would come to town. My dad didn't do this, but a lot of them would come, and they would trade knives, pocket knives. That was their entertainment while their wives were shopping. Trade pocket knives or pocket watches. So that was interesting.
And whittle sticks and all that.
But
well, I guess it would make sense to think of Ackworth as a small community that really serviced the countryside, didn't it? Without the countryside, there wouldn't have been much purpose of having a town, I guess.
It's true. It's true. Well, the town, I think, was established as a railroad town initially, but became more of a central area for trade with the community.
Right. Well, now you were saying before we got started that you all went to Mount Olivet Church to begin with before Mars Hill.
Well, my grandfather did. He was, excuse me. The Durham family, since they were settled there near the Mount Olivet Church property on Marshall on Ackworth U.S. Road, it just became natural for them to be more involved there.
What denomination was that?
Baptist,
Okay.
Southern Baptist. My mother and the Hardy family attended Mars Hill. So, and my dad and I, my dad wasn't a member of the church until I was 13 years old, and he and I joined the church at the same time. So he was, and he was never real active in church, but my mom was, and of course I was then too.
So you've been a member there since you were 13 years old then? 13.
Been fortunate to be able to serve as Sunday school superintendent, a deacon, an elder, and over the years. So it's been a real pleasant experience.
And so you had that original church. How old is the original church building?
Mars Hill Church was organized in 1837.
Yeah.
Which would have been not too long after the county was settled. There was a group of people around Mars Hill area that organized the church. And Mars Hill then came to Ackworth with a mission and opened a mission church here in Ackworth in 1840 something. And they also had one in Dallas, Paulding County.
Okay. So you grew up on the farm, and then what happens? Talk about the schools that you went to.
Well, at the time that I was in first grade, it was Ackworth Elementary, and there was no middle school then. It was Ackworth and Ackworth High School.
Sure.
We were all on the same campus. The McCall Primary now is located where the original schools were. The county had just built a new high school when I was in the first grade, and they had an extra room. Extra room. And I started the first grade in a room in the high school building.
Okay.
I finished my senior year with a class in the same room.
Okay.
So I went to school there after, and then of course the greatest thing that happened with me in high school was meeting my wife, Carolyn. it was interesting. Her mother passed away when she was real small, and she lived with her grandparents for a while. But she moved back to Ackworth when she was in the 10th grade. And I distinctly remember this, and my friend who just recently passed away, and I were walking down the hall, and I met her coming toward me, and it just something happened. I don't know what it was. I told him, I said, I'm going to marry that girl one day. 3 years later, we were married. So that was the most exciting thing. And we're celebrating our 59th wedding anniversary this year.
All right, that's great. You must have been about 11, 12 years old when the sub dam was built and the Ackworth Lake came into existence. I've heard you talk about this before, but talk about what you did for recreation and how the Ackworth Lake figured into all of that.
Well, before I do that, let me just kind of go back a little bit on the Altoona piece of it, because our farm, there's two Altoona creeks. One's called Little Altoona Creek and then Big Altoona Creek. Right. They converged on what was originally my grandfather's farm. Of course, when they built the lake, they bought a huge amount of property to protect for floods, and it has flooded some. But we were able to lease that property back and raise cattle and graze it for hay or plant hay and graze it for cattle as well.
At least from the federal government?
From Corps of Engineers. And but Lake Ackworth, we of course enjoyed the beach and the beach house. That was a place where all the teenagers would hang out, but it's played a big part of our life together. It's my wife and I.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you graduate from high school. What happens then? Where do you go from there?
I went to work. Actually, my first job was at Kelly Motor Company in Marietta. That's no longer exists. Well, I say they no longer exist. I'm not sure if they do or not. They moved they were on Roswell Street there, close to Roswell Street Baptist Church when I worked there. Big paying job, made $35 a week. But I worked for a really nice gentleman who has since passed away, of course. But I worked on there and then applied to get into some sort of federal position. Applied at the post office. I was accepted, but I was going to have to place in it, go to work in Atlanta at night, and that didn't appeal to me. But I got chosen to go into FDIC, and I worked for FDIC there on 5 Points for a total of about 3 years. Went to school at night, went to the Atlanta Law School and also Georgia State College there at night. And then I was about to get drafted in 1961, and I decided I didn't want any part of Uncle Sam's Army. So I joined the Naval Air Reserve program in Marietta. And with the skills that I had acquired and developed at FDIC, there was a tremendous shortage of what they call yeoman personnel, which had experience in office machines, typing, whatever. I was fortunate, and there was no political pull, nothing. I stayed at Marietta for 3 years at the Naval Air Station, and enjoyed that work for two different officers there and developed a relationship. So, but then after school, I went to work at Lockheed for a short period of time, and probably one of the only people that quit Lockheed. I hated the time clock. If I had a job to do, I wanted to finish it, whether it was time to go home or not. So I just walked in one day, I said, I can't do this anymore. So left Lockheed and worked several different positions, doing different things for probably about 10, 15 years, and then ultimately got into banking. 11 of us Ackworth merchants at that time organized Altoona Federal Savings Bank in 1986, 87, opened up. After about a year, I decided to go into the bank and work in the bank. So I worked there at Altoona Federal.
Where was that located?
It's on the Lake Ackworth Drive, which is now BB&T.
Okay.
There was a company out of Atlanta called Premier Lending Corporation that wanted a bank charter, so they bought our bank charter and became Premier Bank. And then 2 years later, BB&T acquired Premier.
Okay. How long was it Altoona Altoona Federal Savings? How long did it stay with that name before Premier?
I believe it was 89, about 4.
Oh, okay. I had 89 to 95. You were director, board of directors, and senior vice president.
Right.
Of Altoona Federal Savings.
Right.
Okay. And so I guess by that time, 20 years ago now, mergers and banks were commonplace all over the country.
Unfortunately, Georgia had too many banks. They allowed too many charters. Mm-hmm. It was a mistake on the state banking and the federal. Really, they should never have allowed as many charters as they did. Mm-hmm. And we suffered from that when we had the downturn. And of course, I was chair of the board and a working chairman at Northwest Bank and Trust, which we organized in 2004, I believe is what it was. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we did not survive. Mm-hmm. No depositors lost a penny, but all of us investors lost our investment, which that's the name of the game.
Yeah. I gathered that you were less than thrilled with some of the banking regulations of that period.
I was very much so. The worst thing about banking started back. Actually, would have been in the early 90s when the federal government said everybody deserves a house, and that was wrong because we were forced by the federal regulations to qualify people based on what they said they earned, and we didn't have to prove it, and we'd qualify them based on the interest rate for that day that was going to change.
Didn't have to prove it. Mm-mm. I could just go in and say I make $300,000 a year, and you'd have to
basically you pretty much have to go with it. And of course, all of those loans were sold under up to FHA or some other federal program.
So this is one of the factors that lead to the collapse in 2007, 2008.
Exactly, because you did loans that were based on 5-year calls, 7-year calls, or 10-year calls, which means the interest rates are going to change at those times, and they were up. Well, the people they might not have been making any more money than they were making when they got approved. So it was really a disaster, brought on a lot by federal regulation.
Was it well, I guess it was regulated. I was thinking that deregulation was a factor. What was in the original the first George Bush, that we had a crisis with savings and loans that came from deregulation?
Came from deregulation. And believe it or not, we were the Altoona Federal Savings Bank. We had applied for our charter as this was happening.
Wow.
And we thought, oh no, what have we gotten ourselves into now? We can't change. We went on, got our charter, and we were the only savings and loan that survived in Cobb County.
Wow. So, so you made a career in banking and retired from the banking, in 2010 or thereabouts?
About, yeah.
Yeah. Have been in retirement ever since then?
Not totally. I
Okay.
stay involved in something, so.
Yeah. Well, you've been involved in lots of community activities, and we might want to talk about some of those things. Like you were a trustee of the foundation for North Metro Tech before its merger with Chattahoochee, and I gather you played a role in the merger with Chattahoochee Tech as well.
Actually, I was not on the board of trustees. I was on the foundation board at North Metro.
Okay.
But I was selected since I was chair of the foundation board with Mike Knowles, who was chair of the trustees. He and I represented North Metro in the merger process. Mm-hmm. That was interesting.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, of course, being local, we were concerned about autonomy. Mm-hmm. We were concerned whether or not North Metro would remain open, and whether or not we would become the stepchild of Chattahoochee. Mm-hmm. That was a concern. But then the positive piece of it was Chattahoochee was larger, they were stronger, they had more money, and had more access to funding. So it was, it was kind of a challenge to see, and it obviously has worked. Mm-hmm. It's worked out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Talk about the bond referenda in Cobb County to buy up Passy Parkland and your role in that.
I was fortunate to be asked by the commission, Helen Gorham, to serve on the first committee. Mm-hmm. We spent an enormous amount of time looking at properties and was able to identify some very choice pieces that ultimately did become parkland. The Bullard tract, primarily, that was the gem. That was the one that was really best. I stayed on after the first referendum with the second one, and we spent additional hours and hours on looking at properties and looking at it. And of course, Sam pulled the plug on it, and I understand and know why he did it.
Sam Owens.
Mm-hmm. The funding for that bond was supposed to be covered by excess funds that was garnered each year from taxes to the fire piece, whatever. And that went away. And he committed himself to say, we will never charge additional tax for parkland. So I understand.
Yeah. Well, that was 2008, I guess, when the economy tanked nationwide, and certainly tax revenues decreased mightily after that.
They did. Fortunately, just recently, this commission has found a way to honor part of that referendum, and I think ultimately they'll probably honor the full $40 million.
Are you still on the advisory committee?
No, I served on the advisory, the SPLOST Education Advisory Committee for about 6 months, and I had some health issues, and I couldn't commit to that.
Right.
It was interesting, though.
Yeah. I know you've been involved with United Way in Cobb County. Talk about that a little bit.
Served a couple of terms with the United Way with Mr. Sam. That's when I got to know Sam Owens, I guess, was working with him on the United Way. I really consider Sam a personal friend. He's a good guy. He really is.
Yeah. So your focus was on North Cobb with.
Yeah.
So well, of course, United Way raises a ton of money every year, I guess.
Yeah.
So talk
Very
about
successful.
that a little bit.
I don't remember the great details as to how much money we raised, but United Way is known and accepted as a really a viable resource. So.
Talk a little bit about the coming of Durham Middle School and Fry Elementary, and how the Cobb County's school district came to own your old farm.
Well, when my parents passed away, there were 4 children still living. All the children were still living. At that time, land prices in Cobb were had risen pretty steeply. Well, none of the 4 of us could really afford to buy the other 3 out. And you could not, at that point, make a living farming. Mm-hmm. So we arbitrarily decided that we didn't want to see a subdivision go on the property. Mm-hmm. And we sought out, first we went to the Parks and Recreation, and they didn't have any funding at all. And we couldn't donate the property because the 2 sisters really needed the money. And so we then went to the Board of Education and said, can we negotiate with you on a price? And through Lindsay Tippins, and he was on the school board at that time, and he was very instrumental in helping us make it happen. Built Fry first, and of course, Miss Fry was heavily politically connected, and Nana got the school named after her husband. That's okay, because it turned out Steve Fry and my dad were close friends. So, but then when they decided to go ahead and put middle school on, then Lindsay helped me, and we worked to get that named after my parents. So it's been a real pleasure. I've worked with the school since they opened, helped get the foundation started, and had a real good relationship with all the principals. I don't work with it as much anymore as I used to, but still enjoy and still stay in touch with them.
Right.
She each year so far I've been asked when the 5th graders are coming up to the 6th grade. The principal asked me to come back and tell them a little bit about the farm. So that's interesting.
Great. And they did a mural of the farm.
It still hangs. Still hangs in the lobby.
That's
very interesting.
That's great. Well, I have never heard of somebody that was an associate member and an elder at another Presbyterian church. I didn't even know there was such a thing, but how did you get to be associate member and elder in Greenville, Georgia?
Well, when we sold the farm, when we sold our home place, the money that came to me, I reinvested it back in land. My dad's always told me, he said, anytime you can buy real estate, buy it. So I took his advice and went to Meriwether County and bought 260 acres there. And then we added to it over the years and added a little bit more to it. But
land's a little cheaper there than it is in North Cobb County.
Yes, right? A lot cheaper. But my wife and I both, being Presbyterian, we tried to find a Presbyterian church to go to. And finally found that there was a little church there in Greenville. And we go, and we get there 15 minutes early or so, and we'd sit and wait and nobody would ever show up. So finally, I got a number of one of the members and called her and told her we wanted to come to that church. And I said, what time do y'all open your door? She said, oh, we don't get there till 5 minutes before. So, but we joined the church. We didn't join it. We actually, at that point, we'd started attending, and then it was, they were down to about, I think, maybe 30 members. It's a real small church. So they just needed some new people on the board, and so we joined, and then I was elected then as an elder. But in the meantime, I didn't want to give up our relationship with Mars Hill. We've been members there for so long. So I talked to the pastor there, and he said, well, you can be an associate member. You just can't vote. Okay. But you can be an associate member. And so we moved our letter to Greenville,
Okay.
and then stayed there on. I think I was elected a 3-year term, and then we were spending more time back up here and attending church up here more, and so we decided to move it back. We just swapped. It's been a good relationship.
Okay, well, I'd never heard of associate membership, so that's something new that I've learned. Well, I know you're having trouble with your voice, and I'm about out of questions. Anything that you would like to add?
Well, there's a couple of things I would like to talk about as far as Ackworth, because I grew up, having grown up here from day one, I've seen so much change. Ackworth died twice. It died when 41 came through.
Okay.
Businesses moved over to 41.
Oh, in about 1950, that period.
Yep. And then for that period of time, it begun to build back a little bit with the Battle food store coming in, with Lacey's. Well, actually, Lacey had not expanded at that point. But with some of the other businesses, Eaton's department store, it kind of built back up. And then here comes 75. It died again. You know, the traffic was manipulated so badly over there. In fact, I had a convenience store there where McDonald's is now, and we actually had to close the store because of the traffic issue. But the couple of things that I enjoyed about having businesses in Ackworth over the years is the ABA, the Ackworth Business Association. I was probably one of the first members that we organized back in the mid 70s and 80s with Larry Braden, who owns Lacey Drug Company, Douglas G., who's passed away now, but we were Ronnie Heaton. We were the nucleus that started the Ackworth Business Association, and now it's probably 500-600 members. So that's been a pleasure. I just would like to say how much appreciation that I, not as a citizen of Ackworth, but as a business owner in Ackworth, still am, of what the mayor and the Board of Aldermen have done for this community, not just Ackworth, but for the community. It's amazing how well it's known throughout the Southeast. You talk about Ackworth and say, oh yeah, that's where Henry's is, or yeah, that's where so-and-so is. And but I've never seen a group of men and women work as hard and as better together as Tommy and his board and his staff. Brian Bultice, the city manager, he's a penny pincher, but he's done a good job. And Sharon Burke, who is the treasurer, I've known Sharon since she was a baby, and she does a tremendous job. I just need to say that I need to how much appreciation that not only I do, but the whole community appreciates what they've done.
Fantastic.
And I, of course, not in retrospect, but I do appreciate you. And I think a lot about that interview that you did with my parents. Those were interesting days.
They were indeed, and he had some fabulous stories to tell, and your mother as well had some great stories to tell. So,
and thank you for what you're doing with this group.
Well, this has been fun to do. I appreciate you, and appreciate you coming in and telling your stories today.
It's my pleasure.